Yes, well, following on from that, because it's important to establish that communism has an impact on freedom, is the general aura of censorship in the West getting stronger as we add collectivist politics into our governments?
Well, unfortunately it is, and it's surprising. Surprising that being the West, having dominated in the world with the collapse of the Soviet Union, with the triumph that Ronald Reagan and Margaret Thatcher established, that we seem to be going backwards. We seem to be taking on all of the disadvantages of communism, in particular in relation to freedom of speech. This is being more and more limited, or there are attempts being made to limit it more, and this is a very bad thing, not only by the state, but also by significant monopolistic, oligopolistic forces in Western society, the worst of which seems to be social media.
Yes, well, let's move on to Albanese's misinformation and disinformation bill. And, we need to remember that this is a brainchild of the Morrison government, which Albanese has now repurposed for his own ends. In your article, you note that this isn't about protecting public safety anymore, whatever that means, but it has instead taken the chilling turn of actively silencing political dissent. Can you explain that, David?
Well, obviously, a lot of this started under COVID, when people took exceptional views. They believed that the state didn't have the authority or the justification to impose the restrictions that were being imposed. It was obvious from the very beginning of COVID, absolutely obvious, that only elderly people and those already sick from something else were more susceptible, in the sense that they would suffer badly from COVID. That seemed to be the situation. And the obligation of the governments was to look after those who were going to be more susceptible. But instead of that, they adopted completely community-wide measures. For example, I live near a beach, Bondi Beach, and I remember that the authorities near me not only closed the beach, I was woken up one morning by someone screaming through a megaphone, and there was an official from the municipality who had a megaphone, and she was screaming to a boy a long way out in the ocean. He was paddling around on his surfboard, and she was screaming to him to come back to shore. Now, what on earth that had to do with COVID is not clear. Obviously out there in the sun and the wind and completely alone, he wasn't going to catch COVID, he was going to spread COVID.
The only reason you get shouted at if you're in the water in Australia is generally because there's a big fin behind you coming towards you when people are going out of the water.
Yes.
But it's ridiculous what we saw during COVID as far as trying to micromanage ordinary human behaviour.
Yes, and the measures taken were outrageous, they were expensive. Closing down cities with lockdowns, for example, stopping people from moving around. The number of police whom I saw on Bondi Beach were there patrolling the beach. They sent large numbers of police there, and they were checking people's identities as they were leaving the beach. And the reason was that you were only supposed to travel a certain number of kilometres, and they wanted to catch those people who travelled too far to go to the beach. Completely ridiculous. And the idea that there would be a problem in relation to COVID, the way it was caught and the way it survived, it was obvious that there would be no problem in the sun, and at the reasonable distances that Australians always observe on the beach between groups of people. It's not the Riviera. You're not jammed into large numbers of people very close to one another who are charged a lot of money. Australian beaches are not like that. Our politicians behaved appallingly, and they did not respect the rule of law. In New South Wales, for example, the Berejiklian government decided that it would escape the scrutiny of Parliament. There was a standing order which required that when the Legislative Council, that is the upper house, met, there needed to be a minister present, only so that that minister could answer questions and so on. They decided that since no minister was present, which they'd prearranged, the President of the Legislative Council decided that the Legislative Council could not meet, so it avoided any scrutiny by the upper house.